Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Mariupol is being claimed by Russia. At the same time, Ukraine is asking for a humanitarian corridor to evacuate Marines that refuse to surrender at the Azovstal Steelworks. And there are reports there are civilians in safety bunkers underneath the site. The scale of the devastation in Mariupol becomes more and more clear, and in this debate we'll be discussing the situation there and all along the 480-kilometre front line in the east. Is Mariupol the shape of things to come in other cities in the Donbas region, now targeted by Russia? We're here in the studio to discuss all matters relating to the situation in Ukraine. Samantha de Benden, who's Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Samantha, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
On the other side of the studio, Oleg Kobzev, Associate Professor of International and Comparative Politics, Specialist on Eastern Europe at the American University of Paris. Oleg, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Joining us in Brussels is Alessia Vasilenko, a Ukrainian MP. Alessia, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And in London, Nikolai Petrov, Senior Research Fellow, the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Nikolai, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
We will, of course, touch on all aspects of this Russian invasion, from the military to the diplomatic to the humanitarian. First, our report on the situation in Mariupol now.
After a long struggle for control of the city, Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed that Russian troops now have the upper hand in Mariupol.
I know that they have captured most of Mariupol. We all are well aware of it. There's also a part of our city where our troops who stayed there are stationed. They remain there at the moment.
The Ukrainian leader said around 120,000 civilians remain trapped in the besieged city, and that efforts are underway to secure their safe departure through humanitarian corridors. Some have already managed to flee. Earlier this Thursday, 3 buses with Mariupol evacuees arrived in Zaporizhia.
I'm so relieved I could cry now. I feel much calmer. It was horrifying, terrible, constant bombing. The longest silence lasted for 10 minutes, and fear. We lived in the basement the entire time.
In Mariupol, the situation remains dire. Russian state television has released images of the damaged city. The steel plant is the last bolt hole of Ukrainian resistance. Capture of the 10-square-kilometre site would allow Russia to say it has full control of the city. Ukrainian families are sheltering in underground bunkers. Although Russians previously seemed determined to take every last inch of the city, Vladimir Putin has today told his defense minister to hold back.
I consider the proposed storming of the steel plant unnecessary. I order you to cancel it. This is a case where we must think. I mean, we always must think, but in this case more so, about preserving the lives and health of our soldiers and officers.
The battle for Mariupol has been devastating. At least 20,000 civilians are estimated to have died since the city was besieged by Russian troops on the 24th of February.
That was Ellen Gainsford with that report. 20,000 civilians estimated to have died in Mariupol. That figure is expected, of course, to perhaps be higher. It's impossible to really give a convincingly precise figure at this stage in the conflict. Let's bring in from Brussels Alessia Vasilenko, the Ukrainian MP who's awaiting us. Alessia, thanks for being with us. I'm wondering how you're feeling right now with the possibility that Mariupol is about to fall, with Vladimir Putin saying that basically the steelworks should be laid siege to because he wants to save Russian lives, the soldiers. No sign of any humanitarian change there in Putin's approach. Basically, he's being very, very tough on Mariupol, as tough as he's been since February the 24th.
To tell you the truth, we are all praying for Mariupol. Anyone who's Ukrainian has all the thoughts set on Mariupol. It has been such a stronghold and such an example of Ukrainian courage, of the resistance, of the defiance, and we hope that it will stay like that. There are evacuation buses and ambulances ready to take people out from that city, but all we're waiting for is for Putin Putin and his generals to say that they guarantee they will not start shooting at innocent unarmed women and children. We have no signals of such, and from previous experience, we know that many evacuation missions have failed because the Russian soldiers had the okay from their command to shoot at civilians. So this is Mariupol in a nutshell for you. But as you were asking the question, I had messages appear on my phone saying that there is now sirens and an air raid attack in the Kropivnitsky area, which is a town in central southern Ukraine. There's attacks and civilians and Russian soldiers shooting civilians in districts of Kharkiv and in the Kharkiv region. So it's pretty much all of the southeast of Ukraine, which is under fire now, and which is under attack of the Russian army, and their strategy remains the same: kill anything and anyone that moves and destroy everything that is Ukrainian.
And do you feel, Alessia, just to ask you a second question, that what we've seen in Mariupol is going to be a pattern that will be replicated across the Donbas as Russia tries to seize total control of that region?
It is being replicated, and we've seen that when Russian troops were stationed and occupying certain areas around Kyiv, the atrocities they left behind, they're just unthinkable to any normal civilized human's mind. And we will uncover a lot of these war crimes in Mariupol. We will uncover them, and we are doing this now in every single city and town that has been occupied by Russia and Russian forces. And I think it's not just about Donbas, because Donbas is what essentially it's the Donetsk, Luhansk region, but it's also about all of the areas that Russia is trying to keep under its control, like the Kherson region and the towns there, and Mykolaiv region, and everywhere essentially where Russian soldiers are setting foot.
Alessia, for now, bear with us, please. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Alessia Vasilenko, a Ukrainian MP, joining us there from Brussels. Samantha, can I bring you in here in the studio to talk more about the situation? I mean, I asked Alessia about Vladimir Putin's words, whether she felt any kind of sense that there was an element of humanity in what he was saying there about not attacking. What is your interpretation of what Vladimir Putin is actually saying? Now, he sat down, we saw the images of him sat down with the top advisors saying, let's not attack, let's just lay siege to the place.
Well, I think that those images are very important for a number of reasons. First of all, you saw the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, definitely today, definitely still alive, definitely still working and in position. So that was an important message that I think he wanted to send. Regarding the Russian soldiers, Russian social media now is beginning to wake up to the fact that their boys are dying in Ukraine. The sinking of the Moskva cruiser ship last week has been a turning point, and parents of the sailors are now coming out that there's a whole network, particularly that's centered around one of the fathers whose son has disappeared, who was a conscript. And he's saying, my son had no business being on that ship in wartime. And he's saying, I have nothing more to lose. I'm not scared. And he's galvanizing other parents who are now going on social media, really talking about the fact that there's a war going on and their boys are dying. And I think that Putin is seeing the tide turning a little bit. A very famous talk show host also last week mentioned the word war on television. He also said, we need answers as to what happened to the Moskva. Now, this is somebody who is normally completely towing the Putin line. So something seems to be shifting. I'm sure Nikolai Petrov, my colleague from Chatham House, who's really specialized in internal Russian politics, will have a lot more to say on that. But so there's that. And there's the fact that they don't really know what would happen if they do storm Azovstal. And what's interesting here is the contradicting messages we're getting from Russia. On the one hand, they're saying we will treat the Azov battalion who were inside the factory, we will treat them decently. On the other hand, just a few days ago, the spokesman of the Defense Ministry said, we consider that any foreign mercenaries in the Azov battalion will not be prisoners of war. You have other Defense Ministry spokesmen, men, yeah, they're all men actually, who've said the Azov battalion does not come under the Geneva Conventions. So you have Russians themselves contradicting each other as to the fate that awaits the people who are holding out in Azovstal. So it's very confusing, and unfortunately, it's as Russia has shown more than once in this war, you cannot take what they say at face value.
It's hard to set any stall in the Geneva Convention being any kind of protection, isn't it? Samantha, thank you very much indeed. You referred to Nikolai. We'll go straight to Nikolai on your cue and bring him in to talk about the situation. Nikolai Petrov, Russia and Eurasia Programme Specialist at Chatham House. Nikolai, thanks for being with us, joining us from London. The situation for Vladimir Putin, how important is it for him to get the result that he wants in Mariupol and to get that result soon?
I think this is exactly the reason why he did order today not to storm this steel plant. The reason is to announce that Mariupol is now under Russian control, and this is extremely important for Putin on the eve of the May 9th Victory Day celebration to report about, effective results of the war he did start. And Mariupol, of course, being the second town in Donetsk region and 10th town in Ukraine, is very important, and it's a kind of a symbol, and it's very needed for Putin not only to report about these results, but to report also about results of the referendum Russian army is organizing at the territory of Kherson region, and thus to look at the whole strip from Russian borders along the coast of the Sea of Azov to Crimea, and perhaps further as areas being under Russia's control.
Nikolai, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to the studio. Oleg Kobzev here from the American University of Paris, Associate Professor of International Comparative Politics, Specialist on Eastern Europe. And what we heard last time Oleg and I were together was about his personal involvement and family links to Ukraine. I've got lots of things I want to ask you about this debate, Oleg, but I want to start by asking you about how things are for the family. How are you getting on?
Well, Dima, Karina, Vasya, Shura, Sasha, Vika, I'm missing two, Maxima, and there, who's the I forgot who I forgot.
Basically, you have to
but I'm saying hello to them because they're watching right now.
You did your own humanitarian mission to Ukraine.
Yes, we went to get them because several of us knew exactly that they might be going through what the people in Mariupol are going. It was a close call. Their house, so this was a mini orphanage that is in the north of Ukraine. And their mom and their dad, who was in a very poor medical condition, hesitated until the area started being bombed. And then they accepted our invitation to come. And we, with journalist Nikolai Miletich from AFP, driving the minivan, neighbor Kim Berg, and an ambulance driver who volunteered thanks to Facebook. Actually, this is why social media sometimes can be very useful and support from many people, including yourself. A lot of moral support.
I offered. That's all I could do. But
we managed to organize this this evacuation of these people. It went very, very smoothly. I must say, the help that we got in Poland was absolutely extraordinary, and in France also. Since we're in an electoral period, and many voters are saying, France is going down the drain. France is not what it used to be. I'm very proud to be here in France and having, in addition to my American passport, having a French passport. Seeing how the French are helping these kids that I mentioned, I'm very proud of what is being done.
You mentioned your American passport, and of course you're from the American University of Paris. I'm interested in what you've got to say about Biden's announcement today about $800 billion extra worth of aid for Ukraine.
More.
They
need more, right? I'm sure Alessia will not disagree with me. We need twice as much, or much, much more.
Let's bring in Alessia to talk about that one. Alessia Vasilenko, the announcement from Joe Biden earlier of $800 million extra aid, and Volodymyr Zelensky speaking to the Portuguese parliament saying that basically they need more munitions. What would you say? Tell us what your view of the situation is.
Look, we need more of everything. The situation is such that we are one small country fighting against a country many times larger than us and the second largest army in the world, the largest army in Europe. This stays the same. It's been the same for 8 years. It's the same for the last 2 months that we've been fighting this war. In order for Ukraine to keep standing and in order for us to be doing so confidently without having to bring in other European countries or other global powers into this war, we need more. We need more weapons, ammunition. We need more financial aid, securities to start the short-term rebuilding of Ukraine, and also financial aid for the economy of Ukraine, which must stay strong in order for the Ukrainian army to be strong against Russia. And at the same time, the sanction packages that are already being employed against Russia, they must be yet enlarged. It's not enough to do sort of half measures on the energy embargoes. It's not enough to say that we switched off a dozen of Russian banks from the SWIFT. All of Russian banks must be switched off from the SWIFT system. And only then will we be certain about the fact that Russia is weak enough and unable to feed this beast of the Russian army, which is now killing Ukrainians. So every time that I'm being asked the question, what else does Ukraine need? Our needs remain the same. We have on a number of occasions made the point of the weapons that we need. There's lists going around online in the public sector of what we can actually publish of what we need, but also more detailed lists have been presented to the governments of, I guess, every single country in Europe and across the Atlantic. And these lists remain the same. Just give us what we need to keep on fighting this war.
Alessia, it is true what you're saying. The lists remain the same. The demands remain the same. Volodymyr Zelensky has always asked for the same things, be it the no-fly zone at the start, which again was obviously refused, to the calls for the arms. Biden's latest announcement, it's heavy artillery, it's 144,000 rounds of ammunition. I mean, these figures just sound like figures. It's hard for me to really quantify what that means. But can I ask you perhaps a more simple question? At the beginning of the conflict, we saw many ordinary Ukrainians taking up arms. How many ordinary citizens now are basically walking around carrying guns?
The number has increased because over 100,000 civilians have joined the territorial defense units, which are essentially battalions formed in local communities of people who are prepared to take up arms and to defend their local communities, their homes, their families. So we have now 100,000 of those. Plus we have an international territorial defense battalion, which has been formed of basically people from abroad, foreign nationals who can come to Ukraine, sign up to these territorial defense units and fight shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians. And that is that. So in times of war, the international law is and the international humanitarian law is very clear on the fact that civilians are allowed to essentially take up arms to defend themselves. And I'm talking about the volunteer defense units, which are also prescribed in the Geneva Conventions.
And Alessia, talking about Mariupol, obviously Marines hold up there. The figure, you can be more accurate than me, so I'll leave that to you. Along with the civilians. I mean, those civilians will be armed as well. Is that fair to assume?
No, I wouldn't say that it's fair to assume. Mariupol is a 400,000 strong city originally. Most of the people have been evacuated or have left the city in one way or the other. The people who remain are the people who are unable to be evacuated. We're talking about women and children in the majority. We're talking about older people who have been unable to physically leave their homes because they were too weak, because they were sick, ill, they had attachments and so on. So it's hardly fair to say that most of them will be armed.
It's awful, isn't it? The weakest people, the most vulnerable people now, the ones most at risk, and they're possibly just in a bunker underneath that site that the Russians are just laying siege to. Alessia Vasilenko, thank you very much indeed. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. We've got Nikolai Petrov in London waiting first. But first, I want to come to you, Samantha. And, you know, you think about those people. You've got the Marines there. I mean, they're making a decision to fight and they're not surrendering. And that's the kind of courage you'd expect from them in their role. You've got civilians there, as Alessia was saying, extremely vulnerable people. And I'm thinking back now to the whole beginning of the conflict when Zelensky, when we had Yulia Tymoshenko on our channel, we had Poroshenko as well, the former leader, calling for a no-fly zone. And NATO's consistently said no.
Yeah, NATO's consistently said no. And I think that one of the things that's really missing in the West is a strategic vision as to how we see this conflict ending. What would we consider to be a victory for Ukraine? What would we consider to be a victory for Russia? How do we, as Europeans, think we will live in Europe with Ukraine that's either divided into two zones or completely conquered by Putin? We seem to be just reacting, you know, putting down sanctions, sending weapons and piecemeal sending weapons. There seems to be a complete lack of strategic vision here. And what I fear is that by arming Ukraine and by not doing the one sanction which would really make a difference, which is cutting off Russian gas, we're going to continue financing Russia. We're going to continue allowing Russia to fight Ukraine. We're arming the Ukrainians enough to push Russia back, but not enough to create a victory. And we're creating a very dangerous, potentially very explosive situation. And regarding sanctions, there's a lot of incoherence in the way we're in these sanctions. Like some oligarchs are sanctioned. Some are not sanctioned. Some oligarchs who live in the UK, who may be much more removed from Putin, are sanctioned. I know the example of somebody I know personally who's the ex-wife of an oligarch. She divorced him 15 years ago. She was paid a lump sum when they got divorced. They hardly speak to each other anymore. She's on the sanctions list. She's a very simple woman. She lives in France. She has she's a ex-wife of an oligarch. I can't say she has a very simple lifestyle, but it's definitely not ostentatious. She's on the sanctions list. The day after she was on the sanctions list, Société Générale sells the shares of its Russian company to an oligarch who's now the biggest oligarch, Vladimir Potanin. He's the head of Norilsk Nickel, which is, as the name suggests, a nickel producer, who's not sanctioned. So when I know a number of oligarchs, and I speak to them, and they say, listen, Samantha, okay, sanction us. Sanction the banks, sanction the energy. We understand they don't want to be named. They oppose Putin. They understand the big guys need to be sanctioned, but they say, but sanction them all. Have some transparency in this process. You know, at least look as though you're applying the rule of law. This seems to be some kind of internal EU corruption that's going on. So we're doing all this, we're creating these lists, it looks great for public opinion, but we're not doing the one thing that will make this war end and which will make the Russian economy completely collapse, which is the only way this war will really end in my rather pessimistic vision of things.
So a lack of real precision and transparency about how the EU is going for the sanctions, the actual energy issue is the one that really should be focused upon right now.
And no strategic vision. At least if there is a strategic vision, we're not being told about it.
Somebody has a strategic vision, and I'm going to go to Nikolai Petrov to ask about that. Nikolai, it's pretty clear that Vladimir Putin, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, I think most people disagree with him, he certainly has a strategic vision. And the things that he's done all along have been things that will be interpreted as aggression, as overstepping, as all the things that NATO wouldn't do. Putin, of course, has been doing it all the time since, I'll say, since 2014 when he took over Crimea. But even before then, Putin, the only one with a real strategy.
I would say that when looking ahead, we can easily find certain moves made several years ago as an element of the present-day strategy. But I don't think this is the case. Putin is very pragmatic leader. He's opportunist in a sense that he wants to have different options on the table and to choose whatever is more effective for him now, any time. So I would not say that he was implementing the strategy which led now to this horrible war. But I would attract your attention to the fact that, in my view, it was possible to avoid this war, or at least to avoid the war in such a large and horrible scale. And I do totally agree with Samantha when she spoke about the lack of strategy. And partly I would explain this by the fact that public opinion plays such a big role that almost all European and Western politicians are not able to make any decisions which would not, which can come contrary to present-day public opinion. And that's why we do not discuss now how is it possible to stop the war and to avoid paying such a huge and terrible price.
Nikolai, thank you very much indeed. Oleg Kobzev, the initiative has been handed to Vladimir Putin time and time again by the tactics, lack of the Western allies.
Oh, yeah, well, I totally agree with the lack of strategy in the West. I completely agree. I have nothing to add to what Samantha said and then what Nikolai added. I would just add that the Europeans, and you remember I said this a few weeks ago when we were together here, the Europeans are completely dispersed. The Germans are much more complacent, and they are at the very beginning, if you remember, the first days of the war in February, they were marching in completely dispersed orders. The Greeks didn't want any sanctions at all. The Italians were hesitating. The Germans said some sanctions, yes, but not the gas. The French had their own version, etc. So yes, absolutely true. But it's maybe even worse than what Samantha had time to say. I disagree. It's not that I disagree, but I would like to bring some nuance to Putin, the pragmatist, the opportunist, the chess player. I think he's much more amateurish and therefore more dangerous than that. With all of the resources that he has in intelligence, not only FSB, but many other services that could have really told him what to expect in Ukraine, he should have known that instead of having an Iraqi kind of war like Gulf War II or some other raid that he would win in 4 or 5 days, he should have expected that a nation would rise, because these are former Soviet citizens also who have the whole legend of fighting the Nazis. Now he's pretending he's playing war. He's playing a remake of World War II, telling us that he's chasing Nazis. It's very interesting how you explain that Nazis have elected a Jewish president and how they're gay also. So yeah, he's fighting the gay and the Nazis. But in fact, he's the Nazi, given all of the methods of war that we're seeing here. It just takes a few phone calls or Skype to ask people what they're seeing outside of their windows in Kharkiv or Zhytomyr or and especially now Mariupol. But what's funny in all of this is that he never thought that the Ukrainians actually would now have an opportunity to rise together as a nation and, for real, fight a great cause, just like the cause in World War II.
Oleg, can I just stop you there and bring in Alessia Vasilenko in Brussels, Ukrainian MP, who is about to leave us. But before you go, Alessia, can you give us a sense of the unity that's been created in Ukraine? Oleg pointing out that what perhaps Putin has succeeded in doing most of all is uniting Ukrainians behind one cause.
Back in 2014, we started this joke saying that Putin should get a medal for doing what no Ukrainian president has ever been able to do, to unite the people. This joke is now different, actually, because President Zelensky is the one who united the people of Ukraine. When the escalation of the war started on the 24th of February 2022, it was the Ukrainian president who first said to all offers from the US to evacuate him immediately. He said that I don't need a taxi, I need weapons to fight the Russians. And he stayed in Kiev with his people, with his army. So did the government of Ukraine, the parliament of Ukraine, and this has incited huge unity among the people, among the military. The volunteer efforts have restarted in Ukraine with double, triple force, and we are still there in the same place. We are still there in complete unity, standing strong for Ukraine, for European values, for peace and security in the world to remain as we know it today, and against the biggest aggressor, against the terrorist state. And all we ask of our partners is to take example from the Ukrainian courage, from the Ukrainian unity, and act similarly in a unified manner on adopting sanctions against Russia, on arming Ukraine, and on having a very clear strategy that Russia is the wrongdoer here and Russia should be paying for all the damage and all the reparation and all the harm that they have caused Ukraine. And this is the only thing that can be up for negotiations, the sums of this of these reparations that Russia is to pay to Ukraine and all the allied forces that stand behind Ukraine today. Nothing else. The last point that I want to make is the guests here, the fellow speakers at the show, they have said some things about the Putin narratives, which are being, which are being spread a lot through different kind of media outlets. So one more narrative is that Ukraine needs to cede something. Ukraine needs to cede nothing. If Ukraine falls, if Ukraine is divided in one way or the other, the peace and security framework as we know it today will fall, and the whole world will be in very big trouble, having to adapt to new reality, having to seek new values and new principles. We cannot afford this as a civilization, as a society of human beings. So this is why Ukraine must stand and the world must stand with Ukraine.
Alessia, your final message for the people of Mariupol before you leave us. Your final message.
We pray for the people of Mariupol, for their strength, for their courage, and for them to wake up tomorrow, see the sunlight, and live their life under Ukrainian flags. They are an inspiration and encouragement to the whole nation of Ukraine and to the whole world. The whole world stands with Mariupol.
Alessia Vasilenko, Ukrainian MP, joining us from Brussels. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts and for your time. We appreciate it very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Oleg, I cut you off. You can take back up with what you were saying. Go ahead, sir.
No, just a little joke that I have also heard is that in the West, to illustrate what you were saying, we have people who are world leaders and who act like clowns. In Ukraine, we have a clown, or he used to be a clown, who is acting like a world leader.
Indeed. Volodymyr Zelensky's previous occupation, of course, as an actor, comedian who famously played in a series of the president, and of course eventually he became the president. So life imitating art, art imitating life. Samantha, the situation as Alessia was talking about it, praying for Mariupol, some very strong prayers indeed are going to be needed to help those people who are now stuck in those steelworks.
Well, there are people who are stuck in the basements, but there's also another very, very worrying phenomenon that's happened in Mariupol and in other cities that have been taken over by the Russians, and it is what seems to be the forced deportation of people from Ukrainian cities into Russia. And in some occasions, they're being told either you can come to safety in Russia or you stay here. So some people who have gone out there. There are stories in the Ukrainian press of families, well, women and children mainly, who found themselves in Russia, who've been offered trains or bus rides further east to the far eastern regions of Russia. Some of them have managed to refuse that and to resist. And one in particular family that I read about managed to get to St. Petersburg and cross over into Estonia and tell the story of these hundreds of people who are being sent to the Russian Far East. There are stories of children being adopted into Russian families before they're even officially recognized as orphans, being Russified. So there's this forced Russification of these children, being told from now on you can't speak any more Ukrainian, you have to speak Russian. So these are very worrying tales coming out of those who have survived Mariupol and who've been sent east and from other Russian cities. So as the town, as the fighting stops in the town, we don't know what horrors we're going to uncover. There have been rumors that have not been independently confirmed of bodies being burnt in mobile crematoriums, and of people being stuck in cellars, living in absolute horror. You know, people dying and not being, and just staying there, dead bodies staying there next to people who are still alive, women giving birth, just awful. I've been having nightmares reading about this, to tell you the truth.
Absolutely hellish scenario.
One more thing about the people being, and I'll say the word deported to the east. Let's remember one thing. Part of the mystique of Putin and this nostalgia about the Soviet Union, the collapse of which, according to him, was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. Part of this mystique is, yes, World War II and the Great Victory, but also the Great October Revolution of 1917 and the heroic Red Army. Now, what did the Red Army do when they entered Crimea in 1920? They said, anybody who was in the White Army or people who were family of the White Army, it's all forgiven. Don't worry, you can stay here and become Soviet citizens. They were almost all of them massacred. So if this is the kind of reference that is still in the history book and becoming more and more, returning more and more to the standards of ideology and politics in I was almost going to say the USSR, in the Russian Federation. I hate to say Russia about that country, because to me Russia is something great. It's beautiful. It's not what Putin is turning it into. What's happening right now in the RF, in the Russian Federation, is this return to brutal terror. Let's remember that the slogan of the Red Army was state terror, terror against the enemies. So now the enemies are the Nazis, in other words, the Ukrainians. And also, when we hear about people being deported, we have to be extremely, extremely vigilant of what is happening to these people. I'll add one more time. This is some kind of a Red Army, red flag mystique mixed with Nazi ideology. Also, when you read certain articles that are there are, look, I have right here, accidentally I had in my pocket, there's a city guy, I can't remember his name, but I can make a few quotes from him, Timofey Sergeyev, who wrote 2 pages, it's all officially on the site of the Russian Information Agency, RIA. It's a call to genocide. It's no longer we're protecting the Ukrainian people from the evil Nazis who are trying to manipulate them and taking over. All of the Ukrainians, he is saying, have been contaminated by Nazi ideology, and we have to clean house when we get there. And there's 2 pages of the kind of measures that should be taken. Compare that to the policies of Nazi Germany in occupied territory, and you get an idea of what could happen, or what is already happening.
Indeed, Oleg. It is an horrific parallel universe that some people are living in this present moment in time, and caught in the middle of this, of course, are the Ukrainian people, as you rightly pointed out. Nikolai Petrov, can I bring you in for... I'm going to ask for a Russian perspective. You don't represent Russia, I know, but you maybe have some kind of an insight into what is going on in the minds of certain people. Perhaps you can sort of give us a sense of what they're thinking now. And I'm interested in this concept of the deportations, people being taken out of Mariupol, being sent to the far east of Russia. Give us a sense of what you think is happening there, what that philosophy is all about.
First of all, I would say that any war brings to the surface very horrible things from different sides. And when you've mentioned all these massacres in Crimea in 1920, when the Red Army came there, the Red Army wasn't Russian ethnic army. There wasn't ethnic dimension at all. And all these atrocities were aimed against Russian noblemen. We should not focus that much, I think, on ethnic dimension, because Mariupol, in fact, is half ethnic Ukrainian, half ethnic Russian.
Right.
What is horrible, it's the situation when, the whole nation is supporting what is going on its behalf, what is done by its army. And I would not see, any very bad intentions connected with all these deportations, although it's understandable that it can be used in a way which we've seen.
Sorry, Nikolai, did you just say there are no bad intentions in Russia, in what Russia is doing in forcing people to leave Mariupol and go to maybe the far east of Russia?
Well, I am not speaking about the Far East. I am speaking about evacuation of at least part of Mariupol population out of the theater of military actions. And this can be used and is used by both sides in different ways. Of course, international community should focus on this and should trace the fate of all those persons, either children or adults, who've been evacuated.
That might be easier said than done, Nikolai, mightn't it?
Sorry?
That might be easy to say, but difficult to actually do, to trace those people.
Yes, absolutely. But let's think in terms that the control over Mariupol as part of Donetsk region, which Russia got now, will last for a while. And we should take care, and we should think not only in terms of what's going on there now at the moment, but what should and what will happen there in several months from now, and how to avoid any kinds of additional violations of human laws, of crimes against humanity, and how to protect population of Ukraine from this eastern region.
So is Russia going to do the same thing with Donetsk, the same thing with Lugansk, the same thing at Kharkiv?
I think that now what Russia is doing is a restoration, as it's put in Russia, or it's capturing all remaining areas of Ukrainian Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which will become parts of Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics recognized by Russia.
Nikolai, thank you very much indeed. Nikolai Petrov there from Chatham House, the Senior Research Fellow on the Russia and Eurasia Programme. Thanks for giving us that insight into how Russia may be thinking this one through, or not, as the case may be. Samantha, can I bring you back in? The situation then, Nikolai talked about sort of at some point tracing those people who get taken to Russia from Mariupol. The issue is, of course, that they didn't have, there's no real choice, is it? You know, stay and risk being killed, or we'll actually take you to Russia. They had no real choice, did they?
No, they didn't really have much choice. I mean, some of the humanitarian corridors were only allowed to go into Russia. Then there were other humanitarian corridors that have been opened up, that, as I understand, are actually working at the moment, where people are allowed to go to Berdyansk and Zaporizhia, which is in Ukraine. But I've spoken to some people whose relatives have been taken from Mariupol, not into Russia, but into Donetsk, which is Russian controlled, and who had to surrender their Ukrainian passports. And since then, this person, who's actually a refugee in the south of France, has no longer got any contact with those relatives. But also to talk about what's going to happen to Mariupol now. Today, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said something so cynical. He said, well, now that Mariupol has been free, people can go back and live there and rebuild the city. I mean, a city that has been completely razed to the ground. He's just talking as if, you know, people can just walk back and take up their old lives. The cynicism is really quite unbelievable.
It is shocking, isn't it?
It is shocking.
This is clearly someone who has profited from the system, who it's believed has millions stashed away. He is the system.
He is the system.
Yeah, it's a complete lack of understanding of what the ordinary people have lost and what his people have destroyed.
Well, I think he understands perfectly well what has happened. He's just being very, very cynical and doing what he always does, which is just spout lies in public for international consumption and for home consumption. But I'd just like to go back to something that Oleg said about Russia, the Russian Federation versus Russia. I think something we have to be really careful of in Europe, in the UK, in the world, is to not sink into stupid Russophobia.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I mean, I'm quoting sort of individual cases. I have a friend of mine who's Russian who left 2 years ago. He was a researcher in a government think tank. He left because he just could not do any independent research anymore. He became a real estate agent in Lisbon to survive. He's just been kicked out of his flat because the landlord said, I don't want to rent my flat to Russians anymore. So, cancelling Tchaikovsky, for goodness sake. I mean, did we cancel Goethe during the Second World War? I don't think we did. Russian literature. I mean, this is we have to remain true to our values. We have to be so vigilant. And there are a lot of, there are programs to help Ukrainian academics. And I know Chatham House also has a program to help Russian academics. Nikolai is one of them, but I mean, he came before the war. And I think we have to, as Western societies, really be vigilant amongst ourselves and not just become completely carried away and blinded by the regime in Russia.
Samantha, I need to stop you there. Oleg, I know you got loads more to say, but time is against us. I'm sorry, sir. Samantha Bendon, thank you very much indeed, Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Thanks to Oleg Kopsev here from the American University in Paris. Great to see you.
I forgot my little Olya Bondarchuk in the eighth one, little
Cool.
orphan.
We've got all the family included, which is fantastic. And what a great mission that was that you mounted. Thank you to, in London, Nikolai Petrov from Chatham House Russia and Eurasia programme. Thanks to Alessia Vasilenko, who joined us earlier, the Ukrainian MP. Do stay with us. We're covering every development on Ukraine as we can. You're watching France 24.